Hi, my name is Vicki Paris Goodman, and I'm an author, and I'm so excited to be with Pearl today.
Hey everybody, it's Pearl Sharenza, and I'm with Women's Successful Living, and we're back for another Conversations with Pearl podcast episode, radio show, and YouTube, if you're watching us on YouTube as well. And I'm so excited to have another conversation around a subject that has been part of my life now for the past 18 months. And our special guest, Vicki Paris Goodman, she grew up in Southern California and she now resides in Prescott, Arizona. She's a retired mechanical engineer. She sings and plays violin semi-professionally. For over 20 years, she served a Long Beach, California area newspaper as theater critic. Ooh. She's currently writing her second book, Speed Bumps and Other Impediments to Life in the Fast Lane, a slightly self-deprecating treatise on the trials of life, especially from the point of view of a type A personality. And I have to share with you, Ms. Vicki, that my son told me the other day, Mom, you're a type A personality. So I just love that you said that on there. So welcome to the show today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Pearl.
You're welcome. So, Arizona from California, a little warm to, California kind of hot to really hot, right? So, why Arizona? Why Prescott?
Well, I don't do heat well. So actually, Prescott's a mile high, kind of like Denver. And our summers are more like Los Angeles summers, but they don't last as long.
Ah.
So we get four seasons here, and it's really nice. It's not like Phoenix, even though we're only 100 miles away.
Wow, I learned something new today. I did not know there was places like that in Arizona. So
Yep.
how cool is that? So I always like, Vicki, to kind of start back like when we were younger and where we thought our life was going to go to where it is today for us, right? I think it's always interesting to hear the intricacies of how when we were little we thought, like for me, I always wanted to be a teacher growing up, and in my high school we had a special work program where I could leave during my senior year of high school and go work at an elementary school with an elementary school teacher to see if it's something I really wanted to do, right? And so as that little girl, I wanted to be a teacher, but I never had the resources to go and get that education to become a teacher. But fast forward, here I am today. I'm a self-care mentor coach. I coach on mental fitness. I coach on setting boundaries. So I am like this teacher that I, as a little girl, wanted to become, right? So tell us about Miss Vicki. When you were a little girl, what was that vision you had that as you grew up, you're going to do this? And how does it compare to today?
Mine was kind of bifurcated or two faceted. I loved math, and I thought, oh, maybe I'll be a math major and become a math professor or something like that. I wound up becoming a mechanical engineer, which is kind of similar. But I also loved music and I loved singing. And I used to think, oh, what about singing and dancing on the musical theater stage? But I was too practically minded in the probably the first three-quarters of my life to consider something like that seriously. So I didn't until retirement. And, now that I'm in Prescott, we have a community theater, and now I've done a couple of things. But yeah, I was too practical to actually ever think, no. You're not going to make it in musical theater. Why even try? Maybe I could have, but I doubt it. I don't think I was that talented. So it was a dream.
That is, I love it. I love your honesty though about it. And, but it also goes to show, I love to talk about soulful self-care and things in our lives that are so important that help pour into our cup or put our cape on, as I like to call it. And so one of the things that you just said is like, we have these dreams and we think, oh, I'm not good enough, or I'm not special enough, or I don't have the talents, right? We tell ourselves these thoughts. So we allow that saboteur and that judge to be like, so I'm going to just put that over here on the shelf until I'm ready, right? And I love that you talk about in your second act of life, as you call retirement, your second act of life, that now you're doing that dream. And that's one of the things that I love to coach the women that I work with is like, what does that second act of life look like for you, right? Like, what do you want to do with that? Like, what did you put on a shelf while you went and got the job or the thing you thought you should do, right? Because you have to feed the family, make a living, those kind of things, right? And what are we going to do to start stepping into that? And I love that that's that reminder that, we can sort of put it on the shelf for now if we need to, because this is something that calls me a different direction, but it's never too late to get it off the shelf. I love that you found in your community there in Prescott that you can do something to pour into that cup of that, that dream you had of, of theater and doing something fun. And I think it's awesome. It's a reminder to those of you that are listening, it's never too late to do something you love. And even if you are in that time of your life that you're working that, that job, the 9 to 5 that's bringing in the bacon per se, you can still go dabble in the things that you like to do, because that is part of self-care. That is part of, hey, I have to work because I need to have this money to provide for my family, but I like to salsa dance too. So maybe you go take a salsa class, right? Or I like some theater. So maybe I go do some acting in my local theater, right? I loved it. That's a great reminder. And Vicki, I want to thank you for sharing and reminding that to all of us today. So the next thing let's dive into. Tell us a little bit about your story, about your journey, because I know it's, we talk about inspired grief. Lead us and tell the listeners where does that come from, and what has led that journey to talk about inspired grief today?
Sure. Inspired grief is kind of an oxymoron, right? I'll admit it, but I kept it in the subtitle of my book because it's exactly what I experienced. So what happened was we moved to Prescott. We moved into our new house, and we were really happy here. We were making friends galore very quickly. And then just a few months later, we get my husband Sam's terminal cancer diagnosis. And I will admit, I did a lot of my grieving right after we got that diagnosis. I used to go to this little used patio attached to a Starbucks in town. I knew no one would be out there. Every afternoon for a week, I went there and just sat and cried my eyes out. And then after a week, I decided the ritual had served its purpose and I could, move on. So after that, it was all about just making sure that Sam had the right care, doing research and seeing if there were clinical trials maybe he should participate in, whatever it took. So that went on for 2 years before Sam died. My story really starts after I lost Sam. Almost immediately, instead of being kind of lost for a while, which is what I expected, I was instead flooded with optimism. It was almost unseemly. But I thought, okay, I know this isn't my nature. I'm not particularly pessimistic, but I'm not real optimistic by nature. I'm kind of middle of the road. But suddenly I'm flooded with optimism. Opportunities started coming my way, like one from the community playhouse that I took advantage of. I started getting insights and revelations that seemed to be coming outside myself, almost as if a helping hand were coming from somewhere to guide me. And what's really stunning about all this is that I was raised in a very secular household where my parents and grandparents thought that people who believed in God or an afterlife or any kind of spirituality at all were foolish, weak, so all of this was coming at me. And even though I'm kind of a control freak by nature, I let myself be led, even though I didn't know exactly what was leading me. And I let myself embrace these opportunities that were coming my way. And then it was really strange because I'm not used to getting thunderbolts of wisdom, often. I think most of us aren't. But suddenly I was starting to understand so many things in a different way, like the nature of loss, of death, of a plan that God has for each of us. And and serendipitous events started occurring pretty quickly. First, I chalked them up to coincidence, but there were just too many of them. So now I call them serendipity. There were some very interesting and timely things that happened. And all of this put together, I call it inspired grief. And the reason I want to get this message out there is because some of these concepts that came to me as insights and clarity from outside myself, I'm just the messenger, some of them are life altering. And people can see these concepts of death and life itself and loss in a completely different way that will make their grief less painful and that will allow them to move on to their next chapter of life more quickly and with less pain. So that's my story.
I love that because I know you and I've talked before, but I lost my son 18 months ago in a tragic car accident. And,
oh my goodness.
And it's interesting you talk about those, what people think too, like when we have these moments, the serendipitous moments, because they pop up. And I remember when Matt first passed, it's a funny story. I had to go to a network meeting. It was on a Wednesday morning. Every morning I go to this network meeting, and our fire alarm in our bedroom, it beeps. So reminding us that, we have to change our battery. Right. And so my husband's like, I'm like, okay, when I get home tonight, we'll do it, because he's got hips that aren't great. So I have to climb on the steps to do it. So I get home that evening and I kind of forgotten about it. All of a sudden it starts beeping in our room, and I go in there and I'm like, all right, let's go change it. So we come out, we sit down, and now the story is Matthew hated our fire alarms when they had to be the batteries changed, because the batteries are the hardest things to get out and put back in. They are so hard to do. And so he would take them out and just leave it, because he's like, Mom, Dad, you have a main one downstairs. It's going to catch everything. And I'm like, all right. So I change the one in the bedroom. I sit down, and the one in my husband's office goes off. Now, mind you, we always change them the times you're supposed to do. So they had just been recently changed. Matt passed in July. So by spring, they had all been changed, the batteries out. So I was like, oh my gosh, let's go do one in your office. So we do the one in the office. The one upstairs goes off. And I look at my husband and I said, that's it. Your son is sending you a sign. Because I believe I had already been feeling signs and stuff like that. And he's like, what do you mean he's feeling a sign? What? It's just, I'm telling you right now. So we go upstairs, because Chuck's got to hold the ladder for me. And I do the one across the hall from my office here. We change it, and I get down the ladder and I say out loud, all right, Matt, I think I've got them all. So you're good now. You can leave me alone with these batteries, right? All of a sudden, the one here in my office goes off, and my husband looks at me. He goes, all right, I believe you now. It was the funniest thing in the world. And it's so true, like those moments. And I like what you said too, because, there are these thoughts. And for those that have lost somebody and you're grieving, neither one of us are saying that your grief is not what your journey is. Our journey is how we accept it. And I love too that you talk about how the family, some family, especially in my family, there's many that have their faith, but they believe that doesn't happen. People will tell me, oh, that's, the devil doing it. I'm like, you believe what you want to believe, and I'm going to believe what brings me peace, right? And I believe that that's okay, because I believe that nothing good is going to come to me, that, nothing bad is going to come to me, because I've got good surrounding me. And so I remember having a conversation with my husband one time, and I was like, so do you ever talk to Matt? He's like, well, how can I talk to him if you're always talking to him? I'm like, oh, for gosh sakes. I'm like, it's just like God. You can talk to him all day long. He talks to millions of people every day, all day long, So kind of laughing about that. But for me, like what really, Vicki, has brought me peace, and I think it's because in my journey, I was such a people pleaser. Like even right now, I'm going through something right now where somebody wants me to, they basically want me to do the work for them so they don't have to recognize that it's something they should be addressing. They want me to make it easier for them, right? And that people pleasing me is going, no, you need to do this. You're not learning a lesson if I do this for you. But I've come so far, and that my boys have seen me. I have a younger son, Nate, as well, and they saw me do this work. So when Matt passed, it wasn't, of course, the shock and he passed in a tragic car accident and all that stuff that happened. But what was happening before that led up to when he passed, it actually allowed me to have some peace. Like many people said to me, you were so strong, and like what you're saying, it's like this peace. And, comes over you. And I think it's where you are in your life journey too, that to understanding, things are going to happen. And trust me, losing a loved one is hard. And losing a child, I would never wish on my worst enemy. However, I know what our relationship was, and he saw me figure out who the heck Pro was. That I feel like for me, honoring that memory of what he saw for me is how I need to continue living my life. Because, yeah, rightfully so, you and I both, we could just hang out in our houses and be depressed all our life, and people are like, oh, they lost somebody, and in some ways, people accept that. And if you have somebody, if you're listening to us and you have a loved one that's has lost me and that's where they are in their journey, go sit with them, go help them come out of that fog of feeling like they were stuck in their grief, because there's still a lot of life to live. And like you said, there's signs. Like I go out and I see things or things happen and I'm like, oh, thank you, for whatever that reason is. And I love to talk about the inspired grief, because there's things that we can do that, like you said, things are happening around you that brings you that inspiration, right? And so I talk about some of that with us, like talk about those that are kind of listening to us. And I mean, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, wow, you make this big move, you leave a state, right? And then you come to this new community. And then, I want to talk for a second too about how you talk about how you found that little spot for a week to allow yourself to accept what was happening to your husband. And I'm sure part of that was so that you could be there for him too, right? Because you have to, when we hear those diagnoses, we have to grieve for what we know they're going to go through and what we're going to go through. And then we have to put our big girl pants on and like be that support system. So talk to us like how important that was for you to do that. And then that change of community and how all that happened so quickly. What was community like for you?
Fortunately, we had made a lot of friends here already. This is a community where there are a lot of retirees. Nobody comes with a whole pack of friends. Everybody's looking to make friends when you get here. But, that anticipatory grief I did on that patio for, every afternoon for a week was self-care. I didn't realize it at the time. It just felt like something I needed to do. But looking back on it, it was self-care. It was just an instinct that I had about something I needed to do in order to be able to do what was necessary to take care of Sam, which turned out to be over a year and a half away. He lived 2 years after the diagnosis and did really well. You couldn't tell he was even sick for the first year and a half. But I knew at some point I'd be taking care of him. So I was more than prepared to do that by the time that time came. But you know what? One of the revelations that came to me is that God has a plan for each of us, and that one person's plan isn't necessarily superior to another person's. For example, and I talk about this in 3 audio episodes I created after I published the book. People think that there's an ideal. A lot of people think there's an ideal life. Like you meet somebody fairly early on, they're, your soulmate, you get married and you're together for 6 or 7 decades before the first one dies. And then the other one follows not too long after that. And that seems to be an ideal a lot of people have. But what if some of us are meant to live sections or segments of our life with more than one person? Who's to say that that's really inferior to life with one person? I actually, when I had this insight, I realized I'm not unlucky. I am very fortunate and blessed to have been with Sam for the 24 years we were together, a little over 21 married. And I'm also blessed to have this opportunity to have this next chapter of life. And so these are the kinds of messages that I have for you to understand certain things. And I spell this out in my audio episodes and some others in the book. So the message is these are really life-changing, life-altering, mind-altering thought altering concepts that, if you can take advantage of them, can really, really change your life for the better. Because I think we awfulize death. We're taught to by our culture. And we awfulize loss. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think we have to awfulize these things. I think there's a better way to understand what they really are.
I like, you just said so many things that just make so much sense to me of how to explain to other people. Because people will say to me, "You're so strong. Like, how are you so strong?" And I'm like, "Sure." Every day I get up and I miss my son desperately. I would love for him to walk through the door and have a conversation with me. But it's not, he while he struggled here on earth, he had still had a good life. He just had things he was dealing with, which we all have things that we deal with, and how we can respond is different for each one of us. But the bottom line was, I was blessed to be his mom for 25 years. He came into our heart through adoption. So he's born into our heart through adoption. We had our younger son through infertility treatments. And it's not, like I said, what you said about we awfulize it. That's such, for me, it's like, that makes so much sense, because people like, it's not the best thing. Do I think it's, oh, I'm not out there having a party because I lost my son, but I'm living my life because I'm still here. I still have things I'm supposed to be doing, because otherwise I wouldn't be here. My dash would be done. Right. And then I still have an amazing husband of almost 40 years. I have an amazing son who's getting married this fall. And then I have, my son, Matt, he left an amazing girlfriend that we know they would have got married, who she'd already had a daughter when he met her, but treated Evie like his own. So I have these blessings, right? So how can I look at that? It's awful, and people don't understand that when they look at me like, and people will say, you should be a grief coach. I'm like, I don't want to be a grief coach. That's not the world that I want to be in. But I am going to say, my life doesn't have to be awful the rest of my life because I've lost a child. It just means that my life is different from July 22nd, when I went to July 21st to July 22nd when I woke up. It's two different things that happened that altered my life moving forward. But there's things I want to do still. There's things that we're doing in his honor. Like, we're writing a book about raising a child of a different culture. We're getting families together that want to share their stories about, it's called Beyond Skin Deep, stories of intercultural adoptions. We're talking about those stories so that honoring his memory and doing something, it was on his passion to share with families, to say, this is what I went through. Here's the good, the bad, and suggestions if you want to go down this path of adoption, right? And so it's not like what you said. We awfulize it, and there are some people that I've met that are grieving, like they just are. They just kind of get stuck in that, and if that's you and you're listening, that's your journey. I never discredit anybody's journey. It's your feeling what you're going through, right? And so when you said we awfulize, I was like, God, that makes so much sense about how people look at me and go, how are you so strong? It's like, yeah, it's sad that I lost my son, but it's not awful that I'm still living. It's not awful that I still have happiness thinking about him. It's none of that at all. And gosh, if we can touch somebody listening to us to think about and look at their grief journey differently, that's why I do these things I do and have conversations like amazing people like you, Vicki, to talk about that. So tell us, like, where are you going? How are you getting your message out? How are you taking your message to empower others as well?
Well, podcasting like this, I think I'm so grateful to you and other podcast hosts for giving me the privilege of talking to your audience about these concepts and the book and the audio episodes and all of these ways in which I want to change the way people think about death and loss, God's plan, and life itself, so that they have a chance to see that where my husband Sam is is a beautiful place, the most gorgeous place imaginable. And it's where your son Matt is too. I'm convinced of it. And that is very comforting. And we're all going to go there and we'll be together with our loved ones again. I believe this. There are too many near-death experiences reported, and I haven't even read very many of them yet, but I've read a couple of really crucial ones that have convinced me that all this is the case. And so why not enjoy our lives until we can be together with those people who predeceased us, who we cared so much for? You know, I hate to see people stuck in grief because, as you say, it may be their journey and their way of learning certain lessons from God. But on the other hand, I think, wow, you know, it's been 6 years and she's still staying home all the time and not happy and not really doing things, maybe partly out of guilt. And I address that too. Uh, and to me, it seems that there's a better way.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. I feel there can be a better way, and it's a matter of asking for help. So if you're listening or watching, ask for help. Find somebody who maybe, like reach out to Vicki. We'll put in the show notes how you can reach out to her as well. But reach out to somebody, even me, if you want to reach out to me, reach out to somebody and just ask for a hand. Can you help me understand? Can you help me, move forward? I have a grief group I go to, and I've got friends that, since my son's passed, I've got friends who've lost their child, and I just kind of go sit and just be there and be like, hey, these are some of the things that I went through. These are some of the feelings that I had. It may be different from you, but don't be surprised if this can happen. It's going to be okay that if these things pop up, right? And so it's so important to put that hand out. And if you are listening and you haven't lost them, but we're talking and you're thinking of somebody that's in the same position, just reach a hand out. Just stop by, bring some groceries by, sit down and say, I'm here for you to laugh, cry, or scream with, whatever you want to do, right? Maybe even go and hit a smash place where you go smash things to get that energy out. Do something that kind of helps you move those feelings around and helps them, to address it, because we don't want you to just sit by yourself, because there's no reason to be on your own with this journey. It's interesting to have people respond to our journeys, right? I did an Instagram post where it was one of those things where you put a picture and it moves and then it shows something else, right? So my picture is my son Matthew and I at one of his football games where I'm leaning over and I'm hugging him, and it leads to his headstone. And his headstone is a picture of him. And it says, so Matt used to always jokingly catch me off guard. He'd be like, hey, Mom. And I'd go, what? And he'd go, these nuts, right? So it was just a little joke he did, right? So when we were doing his headstone, Vicki, the gentleman at the funeral home, he's like, does he have a special thing? He said. And I just looked at my husband. He goes, you're not. And I go, I am. I'm getting the last joke. And so we have on there, it says, these nuts. So interesting enough, that post on Instagram, I think the last time I looked, it had like almost 1,000 comments, and people thought it was funny, but many people are like, that's disgusting. How could you do that? And things like that. And I'm like going, and I respond as much as I can. You go follow me, go look at my other videos and you'll understand the story. But then the other ones who go, it must have been funny. It makes them laugh because it says, when we look at his picture, because we had a black and white picture of a headstone too. It says a lot. And then I think it also says something, I lived a long and beautiful life or something, right? So it's interesting see how people respond to how we respond to our grief, right? I have a friend who lost a son, and she said that somebody told her, you should be over it by now. And so I looked at her, I go, they're a good thing it wasn't me they said that to, because probably I might have ended up in jail, because it's like, don't ever say that to somebody, or somebody, excuse me, or somebody will be like, I don't know what to say. And I'm like, that's the best thing you could say to me. That is the best thing in the world to say to somebody that's grieving is, I don't know what to say, because that means you're saying to me, how can I be there for you? Right. And I think
Right.
that's important if you're listening to us, is to understand there's ways you can show up for somebody that's grieving, but there's also things you can do as the person that's grieving to look for those serendipitous moments that are there. You just have to look for them. And once I started really opening up, and now even my husband, he'll be like, hey, I feel like Matt was sitting in that chair today. How did you feel about it? Right. I'm like, oh, yeah, he was sitting there hanging out with us today. Right. Because we have this chair in our family room that he would always sit down and have conversations with us. Right. And so every so often I'll feel him kind of just sitting there. And people look at me and go, oh, you're kooky. I'm like, well, you believe what you want to believe. But I believe, like you said, I know that one day he's going to be there. I know that he's up there hanging out with his grandparents that he loved dearly, and he had a couple of friends that passed before him. I know he's reconnected with them and so I think it's important that we take those moments and let them bring us peace and let them inspire us, like what you said, inspired grief, let them inspire us to continue to living our life. Would you agree?
Yes, wholeheartedly. It's why I want to get the book out there and the audio episodes, because I want people to have their best life and to know that having to switch gears into a new chapter of life is cause for celebration, not for mourning or saying, well, I guess I'll make the best of things. That's not it. You can have a wonderful next chapter of life that's almost as good or maybe even just as good as what you had before. It's just another facet of life, and you were meant to live it.
100%. It's like, with my son's wedding coming up, I'm like, if I was sitting in my room and not getting out, I wouldn't be enjoying the process of planning a wedding, the process of going shopping for the dress, the process of being able to take care of photography for him. I wouldn't be in those moments and enjoying those moments. I would just kind of be existing through life. And that's the last thing that I know I want. It's the last thing that I know my son wants, but most certainly it's the last thing that I know that God wants for any of us. Right. And I think it's amazing that you're sharing the story. So tell everybody about the book and about your upcoming book as well.
Oh, okay. So the book is To Sam with Love, a surviving spouse's story of inspired grief. And but first, you know what? Let me tell you about the free gift that I have. Uh, that's the audio episodes that I referred to before. They're about 12 to 15 minutes each, and they are life changing. They are not to be missed. These concepts are a whole new way to think of death and loss and God's plan that puts our culture's awfulization of the subject to bed once and for all. And that means that as a survivor, you can look to your next chapter of life with optimism and enthusiasm and no guilt. To get the 3 audio episodes, go to my domain, inspiredgrief.com, enter your first name and email address, and that will subscribe you to the series. So it's free and well worth the time you'll spend. Get the audio episodes. Also, my book is on well, I've discounted the price actually. This is the best pricing available for To Sam with Love online at inspiredgrief.com/book. Discounted it there. So that's the best place to buy the book. So the book and the free audio episodes are a toolkit. After the audio episodes completely upend the way you think of death and loss, the book will serve as an example or roadmap to guide you forward into an exciting new chapter of life.
I love that. So we'll put all that in the show notes. If you were listening or driving and you couldn't write any of that down, it's going to be in the show notes when you're go online or go to YouTube and you watch and listen. You can read the show notes there and you can grab those goodies. And those are some really great free. That's a really great free goodie. And to have easy 12-minute things to listen to inspire you is just so powerful and so needed. So tell us, you have another book coming up. Tell us about the next one coming.
You did ask me to talk about that too. So it's speed bumps and other impediments to life in the fast lane. And it's about the trials of life, but especially from the point of view of a type A personality, which is what I've pretty much been most of my life. And it's pretty self-deprecating, as you mentioned early on. Uh, which makes it kind of funny in places because I'm laughing at myself through the whole thing. Because now, having lived so much of a life as a type A personality, I can look back on it and just kind of roll my eyes, thinking of so many times I got upset when I didn't need to, so many times when I got impatient when I didn't need to. One of the chapters, my favorite chapter so far, is Road Rage 101, just to give you an idea. So it's going to be a fun book, I think. And I think it'll be great for type A's and also non-type A's, because every non-type A has a type A in their life, at least one, right? So that's
That sounds like fun. If you're driving, you can't see the big smile on both of our face. I'm laughing, going, "Oh my gosh, I could just imagine the humor in some of those chapters that are going to be there." I'm so excited. So, you guys, you've heard all about where you can go grab the book and watch for the next book coming up. I want to ask you a question, Vicki. So you talked about like what you did for self-care when the diagnosis came in for your husband. And so since his passing, what are some of the things that you ensure that you do for your self-care, especially around, because there are those moments, there are those waves that come in, where we miss them, even more than other times, So what do you do to help you through the waves of the grief? And then also in general, what do you do for yourself?
To be honest, in my case, I don't have too many sad moments thinking about Sam. He was a very funny man. Usually something happens to make me think of one of his jokes or one-liners or something else that made me happy. But when he first died, and for quite a while afterwards, and I'm so glad you asked this question because I forgot to talk about it, I do have some tips for you. Be open to guidance that you may feel coming from outside yourself. Trust it and let yourself be led. Same thing with those opportunities I talked about. You don't have to feel guilty if opportunities to do something fun or interesting or productive or just interesting come your way. Embrace them. And the most important thing I did was I struck a balance between activity and alone time. So many people will say, keep yourself as busy as possible. You won't have time to think or hurt. I ignored that well-intended advice because I knew instinctively that that was not the way to go. So while I'm embracing opportunities, I'm making sure that I balance that out with time alone, whether it be just sitting and thinking or reading or taking a walk or taking a hike or, whatever it is. It's basically quiet time that allows me to think about what's happened to my life soon after losing the love of my life. So that was really great. And it was actually put to the test because a few months after Sam died, COVID hit, and suddenly that balance was really upset. And I had been doing so well. And now the next few months, I undergo three uh, 10-day depressions. Each one lasted precisely 10 days, which is kind of interesting. I would just sit and feel so sad and barely be able to move for 10 days. And that happened 3 times. And since it didn't happen in the 7 or 8 months before COVID hit, when it was actually more likely to happen, I think it was the fact that that balance I had achieved between activity and alone time was upset by COVID restrictions.
I appreciate your honesty and understand that those times are going to come up. And you're right, COVID. I feel like COVID, has changed for especially somebody who lost somebody during COVID. It was such a different journey than coming before and after COVID. And to take the time to when those 10 days came up for you to just to let it process, that's for me, like my waves will come in, and like when Matt first came, I first passed. I mean, I felt like I was so strong for everybody else. And when finally everybody went home, I like told my husband, okay, it's now my time. I need to just like process this my time. And I remember in the middle of like everybody was here, people, were trying to do the service and everything. I'd gotten this phone call for an organization that wanted to name a day after me in Syracuse, New York. And we talk about serendipity, right? Here I am in Tampa, Florida, it's Syracuse, New York. I'm like, okay. And my grandfather he was from Syracuse, New York. He was a big part of our journey to adopt, a child. The day we adopted Matthew, it was in California. I was staying at my parents' house when I came down with him. And I told my mom and dad, you got to call grandma and grandpa, come over right now. My husband wasn't even with me. He was still in Virginia. And Matthew was in a bassinet in my parents' room, and my grandfather and grandma were there. I'm like, oh, grandpa, I'll be right back. I got something in mom's room for you, right? And I come out with this baby, right? And I give Matthew to my grandfather. He goes, I knew you had a baby in that room. I'm like, how did you know? He goes, I just knew. I'm like, okay. So fast forward, here Matthew's passed. It's fresh, it's only been a day or two. People are, like I said, coming in. And I get this phone call, and I'm like, that's a serendipitous time. My grandfather's saying, he's here, go to Syracuse, let them name the day after you, So I took those moments in to be like, allow that. But then there was those moments like I was standing in the grocery store ordering meat, and I just started crying for no reason. I just cried. And the poor guy behind the counter goes, are you okay? I'm like, I'm fine. Had to process it. So allowing that time to process. And like you said, allowing those times they come up is so, so important. So I appreciate it. I'm glad I asked you that question so we can help others to understand that it's okay to go through those times. Allow your time space to let those waves come no matter how they come, because they are going to come. But it doesn't have to send you down the rabbit hole either to keep you there, right? So, and it's also honoring their memory, going, oh, I remember, this is, kind of like, I feel too, it's kind of a hug for me from them, from Matt being like, I'm just hugging you. I know you're missing me today, so I just want to hug you, So I think that's my way of looking at that. So this has been great conversation. I cannot believe our time has just flown right by. It's gone so quickly. So what I want to do, so I already shared, Vicki, that we're going to do our cards. We got our cards, Better Question, Better Life. So Vicki, I'm going to shuffle these. You're going to tell me when to stop. And then we're going to read what the card says for you. So here we go. Tell me when to stop.
Stop.
Okay. Your card says, I think I know the answer to this, but am I being true to myself? Are you being true to yourself?
Boy, great question. Because I don't think I was true to myself in my earlier years. And one of the great things about this stage of life is that I finally know who I am. Maybe that happens for a lot of people, but I think because of the nature of my relationship with my mother, stuff, I didn't know who I am who I was for a long time. And it is so wonderful. I always thought, oh, to be young is wonderful and to be older, not so good. No, I am having the time of my life now at age almost 69.
Wow,
So,
you look good for
yeah.
69.
Well, thank you.
Yay.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think I'm being true to myself. I don't know quite how to elaborate on that
No,
other than what I've already
you
said.
gave it an amazing answer, because
Okay.
it's true. Like we sometimes, I did a presentation the other day at my network group, and we are talking about your I am statement. And I went through my story and everything. And there was a gentleman sitting there. He was like, he just sat back and he had this look on his face. I'm like, are you okay? He goes, my I am statement. Who the heck am I? And I was like, and we kind of talked about it a little bit. I'm like, it's never too late to figure that out. And if you don't know who your I am statement is, that's something that I love to help clients do, is like walk them through that, that statement and understand, finding out what is your true passion. Like, who are you? What is you want to do? And be inspired to go out and do that. And make sure you're on the right path of what it is you want to do, because maybe you're working a job you're not happy with. Maybe you're not supposed to be there. So let's go figure that out for you. That's the fun part of what I get to do when I coach my clients. So I just want to thank you so much, Vicki, for sharing and for playing the card game with us. And I want to remind everybody, if you are somebody who's lost a loved one, please know our prayers are with you. You're not alone. And if you want somebody to speak to, you can certainly reach out in the show notes to Vicki, or you can also just send me an email at hello@wsliving.com. That's hello@wsliving.com. And I'd be happy to have a conversation with you. And just remember that we come into this world, we're an oyster that's a little rough on the outside, but as you really start figure out who you are on the inside and you start shining that outside, you will find your inner pearl of greatness. And I hope you go out today, and I hope you become that Shira that you are. Have a great day.